The miracle of the October War, Egypt's greatest victory. It was a day that changed the course of history. The 6th of October, 1973, when Egypt defied the impossible and stunned the world. This is the story of the miracle of the October War. The aftermath of defeat, 196-719-73. In 1967, Egypt suffered a devastating defeat in the Six-Day War. The Israeli forces occupied the Sinai Peninsula, and the once mighty Egyptian army was left humiliated. For 6 long years, Egypt lived under the shadow of this defeat. But deep within the Egyptian soul, a fire was burning. A fire fueled by pride, pain, and the unyielding desire to reclaim dignity. President Anwar Sadat, underestimated by both allies and enemies, was preparing for a war that would rewrite history. The impossibility of crossing the Suez Canal was more than just a waterway, it was a fortress. On the eastern bank, Israel had constructed the infamous Bar-Lev Line, a seemingly impregnable series of sand berms, bunkers, and artillery positions. Military experts across the world declared it impossible to cross. But Egypt had a plan so audacious, so meticulously crafted, it would later be called a miracle of military strategy. The deception plan Operation Badr. Operation Badr was born in secrecy. Egypt executed one of the greatest deception campaigns in military history. Troop movements disguised as training exercises. False signals sent to mislead Israeli intelligence. Even diplomatic moves suggesting Egypt was not ready for war. The Israelis were lulled into complacency. The date chosen for the assault was strategic. October 6, 1973, coinciding with Yom Kippur, the holiest day in Judaism, and Ramadan for Muslims. It was a moment when vigilance was at its lowest. The crossing, Egypt's moment of glory. At exactly 2 p.m., the silence of the Suez was shattered by the thunder of 2,000 Egyptian artillery guns. Simultaneously, waves of Egyptian soldiers and rubber boats began crossing the canal under heavy fire. But the real miracle? The Egyptians used high-pressure water pumps to dissolve the massive sand walls of the Bar-Lev Line. In less than 6 hours, something the world thought impossible had been achieved. Over 80,000 Egyptian troops crossed the canal, breached the Bar-Lev Line, and established a stronghold on the eastern bank. By sunset, the Israeli defense line had crumbled. The spirit of the Egyptian soldier, what made this war a miracle, was not just the tactics, but the unbreakable spirit of the Egyptian soldier. Facing superior Israeli technology, the Egyptians fought with determination, courage, and a belief that they were fighting for their land, their honor, and their history. Stories emerged of Egyptian soldiers holding their positions under relentless airstrikes, refusing to retreat even when outnumbered. The Israeli counterattack, and the turning point. As the initial shock faded, Israel launched a fierce counteroffensive. The Battle of the Chinese Farm became one of the bloodiest encounters, with Egyptian forces holding their ground against Israeli tanks and paratroopers. Though Israel managed to mount a crossing to the western side of the canal later in the war, Egypt had already achieved its strategic objective, breaking the myth of Israeli invincibility. The aftermath. A psychological victory militarily. The October War ended in a ceasefire brokered by the United States and the United Nations. But for Egypt, the war was a colossal victory, not merely of land, but of dignity, pride, and psychological liberation. The Egyptian flag flying on the eastern bank of the Suez was a symbol that Egypt had risen from the ashes of 1967. It shattered the myth of Israeli military superiority and reshaped the geopolitics of the Middle East. The road to peace, the October War, set the stage for diplomatic breakthroughs. In 1978, Egypt and Israel signed the Camp David Accords, leading to the full return of the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt. It was a victory won by blood, sacrifice, and brilliant military strategy. The miracle of October was not just about breaching a canal or toppling a defense line. It was about the human spirit overcoming the impossible. A moment when an entire nation stood as one, and through courage and sacrifice reclaimed its place in history.